5 years ago, a billionaire founder ordered a quiet woman off his private floor and out of his company. He cited a breach of protocol. She said nothing. This is the story of what she did next, and how this month she became the majority shareholder of every asset he owns. Her name is Elise Carter. To the tech world, she was invisible. To Jason Park, the founder of Ethelgard Technologies, she was a problem to be removed from his private executive floor. But her silence that day was not surrender, it was the beginning of a strategy. This is the investigation into a 5-year plan of relentless focus, and how a single moment of profound disrespect was methodically converted into a takeover worth over $600 million. Elise Carter arrived in Silicon Valley not with a degree from Stanford, but with a certification in environmental services and a resolve forged in Southeast Washington, D.C. She was 28, a single mother to a 4-year-old son, Isaiah, and her plan was pragmatic: secure, stable employment with health benefits at one of the corporate campuses that offered them to full-time staff. By early 2019, she had landed a coveted daytime cleaning position at Ethelgard Technologies' flagship headquarters. For Jason Park, Ethelgard was the culmination of a narrative he had meticulously crafted. A dropout from Seoul National University, he had founded the company at 25 with a seed round from a legendary venture capital firm. His genius, loudly proclaimed in every tech profile, was in predictive behavioral algorithms, software that could anticipate consumer desire. By 33, he was a billionaire, and Ethelgard, Ether Campus, was his temple. The building was a testament to transparent hierarchy. The first 3 floors were open plan, all glass and collaborative spaces. Floors 4 and 5 housed senior engineers and project leads. The entire 6th floor, the apex, was Jason Park's private domain. It contained his office, a secure server room, a private gym, and a lounge. Access was controlled by biometric scanners and a dedicated elevator. The rule was absolute: no cleaning staff on the apex during business hours. Deep cleaning was scheduled for Sundays, supervised by security. Elise knew the rule. On a Tuesday in March, her supervisor Marla radioed her. A client meeting had spilled coffee and pastry crumbs in the Apex lounge just after lunch. It needed to be addressed before a potential investor tour at 3 p.m. The Sunday team was off-site. Marla gave Elise a temporary keycard, deactivated for the server room, and told her to be in and out in 10 minutes. Jason Park was not supposed to be there. His calendar showed him at an off-site leadership lunch until 2:30, but the lunch had ended early. Park returned to the Apex at 1:50 p.m., accompanied by his chief technology officer and the very investor they were prepping for. They entered the lounge to find Elise Carter, vacuum cleaner in hand, quietly working. According to the internal HR report filed later, Park's reaction was instantaneous and severe. He did not ask who she was or why she was there. He pointed at the elevator and said, loud enough for the investors to hear, "This floor is private. Get out, now." The CTO tried to interject to explain the spill. Park cut him off. "The protocol exists for a reason: security breach." Elise, following her training, stopped her work, gathered her equipment without a word, and left. The humiliation was not in the moment of dismissal, but in the machinery that followed. She was suspended that afternoon. The following day, Marla, under clear pressure, terminated her employment. The official cause was violation of security protocols. Her exit interview noted she showed no remorse. The truth, Elise would later state, was that she had been too stunned to speak. The health insurance for Isaiah ended that Friday. This is where the surface story ends for most people. A minor, cruel injustice in a system full of them. But for Elise Carter, this was a data point. The second data point arrived via a severance packet that was notably generous for a probationary employee: 6 months' salary. It came with a stringent non-disclosure agreement. The third data point was a call from a junior HR employee, a woman named Chloe, who leaked the real context. Jason Park had been furious that the investor had seen disorder. The incident, in his words, made Ethelgard look uncontrolled. The cleaning contractor had been threatened with losing the entire account. The severance was hush money. Elise signed the NDA and took the money. It bought her time. But here is the fact most narratives miss. Elise Carter was not just a cleaner. She was a voracious autodidact with a mind built for pattern recognition. For 18 months, working evenings, she had been auditing online courses in corporate finance, and data analytics from MIT and Stanford. Her job had given her a unique vantage point. She cleaned the offices of engineers, analysts, and executives. She saw the confidential whiteboards left erased, the late-night pizza-fueled panic before product launches, the hushed conversations in empty hallways about burn rates and pressure from the board. She filed it all away. The firing did not break her. It gave her a target. With the severance money as a runway, she made two strategic decisions. First, she used part of the funds to formally enroll in an accelerated online degree program in data science, leveraging her audit credits. Second, she reached out to a former early-stage employee of Ethelgard, a woman named Priya Sharma, who had left the company after a clash with Park over ethical data use. Priya, now running a small ethical AI nonprofit, became an unlikely mentor. Over coffee, Elise laid out her observation. Ethelgard's culture, from the locked apex floor down, was not just secretive, it was paranoid. Its valuation was built on perception of invulnerable, proprietary technology. What if that technology had a flaw? Priya listened, then asked a pivotal question. You saw the servers on the 6th floor. Did you ever see them being serviced? Elise recalled. The secure server room on the apex was always locked, but on Sundays, a third-party hardware technician from a firm called Kronos would arrive. He didn't interact with the IT staff downstairs. He went straight up, a private maintenance contract for the crown jewels. Elise, with Priya's guidance, began to research. Not Ethelgard's software, but its physical infrastructure, its supply chains, its less glamorous dependencies. She traced the ownership of the Kronos firm through labyrinthine business records. It led to a shell company, which was partially owned by another company, which had received quiet seed funding from an Ethelgard venture arm. Jason Park had effectively created a circular, controlled ecosystem for his core hardware. It was brilliant insulation. It was also a single point of failure. In 2020, as the pandemic shifted the world online, Ethelgard's stock soared. Jason Park became a media darling, a visionary who had foreseen the digital shift. Elise Carter completed her degree with top marks. She landed a junior analyst role at a mid-tier investment firm, her cleaning history erased from her resume. Her specialty, forensic analysis of tech company operational risk. She was now inside the system that had ejected her, and she began, entry by entry, building a financial model on Ethelgard, not on its dazzling algorithms, but on the brittle, arrogant infrastructure that supported them. She identified the Kronos dependency. She calculated the cost of a hardware failure if Kronos faced a supply chain shock. She mapped the company's debt, its aggressive expansion leases, its reliance on perpetual investor confidence. She built a thesis that Ethelgard was not a tech unicorn, but a house of cards dressed like a fortress. All she needed was a catalyst. It arrived in the spring of 2023, a global shortage of a specific semiconductor module. Kronos' primary supplier was crippled. Ethelgard's secret, exclusive hardware pipeline began to dry up. The company's public statements were calm, but Elise's model turned red. Maintenance cycles were delayed. Server performance on the apex, the heart of their operation, began to degrade. The board grew anxious. Park, in a bold move, decided to acquire Kronos and its supplier outright to secure the chain. The deal would require a massive bridge loan, leveraging Ethelgard's own stock as collateral. The streets saw it as a power play. Elise Carter saw it as desperation. She took her model, now a sprawling map of interconnected vulnerability, and her life savings of $80,000. She approached a former professor who now worked at a hedge fund known for aggressive short positions. She presented not as a victim, but as an analyst with a once-in-a-career insight. The fund's partners were skeptical until she revealed her intimate, physical knowledge of the very server room at the center of the crisis. They asked her one question, "What's your edge?" She replied, "I know where the bodies are buried because I used to clean the room they're buried in." The fund gave her a position and a mandate, prove it. For the next 18 months, she guided them. She identified the key lenders for the Kronos acquisition. She predicted the exact quarter when delayed hardware maintenance would cause a critical, public-facing system outage. It happened in November 2023, a 7-hour failure of Ethelgard's flagship analytics platform. The stock plummeted 15% in a day. The hedge fund made millions on its short position. Elise Carter earned a 7-figure bonus, and more importantly, a reputation as an oracle of doom for overvalued tech. By early 2024, Ethelgard was bleeding. The Kronos acquisition had become a debt millstone. Park's attempts to raise new capital were met with cold shoulders. The board was planning a coup, and that's when Elise made her move. She didn't go to the board. She went directly to the consortium of nervous, primary lenders holding the bag on the bridge loan. Using her new credibility and the fund's backing, she proposed a debt-for-equity swap so aggressive it was tantamount to a hostile takeover. The lenders, facing massive losses, listened. They formed a new holding entity. They installed a new interim CEO to stabilize the company, and they appointed a new chairperson of the board to oversee the dismantling of Jason Park's empire. The appointment was announced on a Friday. That Monday morning, Elise Carter walked into the Ethelgard headquarters for the first time in 5 years. She was not carrying a vacuum. She was carrying a proposal to dissolve the Apex floor entirely. And as the elevator doors opened onto the 6th floor, Jason Park was waiting in the lounge, the same space where he had once ordered her out. His security clearance had been revoked at 8 a.m. He had been trying to reach the new chairperson all morning. He stared at her, not recognizing the woman in the tailored suit, until she spoke. He stared at her, not recognizing the woman in the tailored suit, until she spoke. The lounge looks different in the daylight, Mr. Park, less spilled coffee. And just like that, 5 years collapsed into a single, silent second of recognition. His expression moved through confusion to dawning horror to a forced, cold composure. Carter, the word was flat. Elise smiled, a small, contained motion. The board is waiting, you should join us. She walked past him toward the conference room, the new interim CEO, a stern man named David Chen, falling into step beside her. Park had no choice but to follow. The Apex conference room, a glass-walled chamber overlooking the valley, was filled with the new reality. The board members, a mix of old faces and new representatives from the lender consortium, avoided Park's gaze. At the head of the table, a place card read Chairperson Carter. Elise did not sit immediately. She placed her tablet on the table. This meeting is called to order. The first resolution, acceptance of the resignation of Jason Park from his roles as CEO and board director, effective immediately. Park's chair scraped back. This is a coup, my shares, David Chen interrupted. Your shares are currently collateral against the Kronos acquisition bridge loan. The lenders, who now control 38% of voting equity, have voted with the board. The resolution passes. These finally sat. The second resolution, a forensic audit of all hardware procurement, maintenance, and the Kronos acquisition, with findings to be reported directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. One of the old board members, a man named Reynolds, sputtered, "An SEC audit, that's suicide. The stock will tank." Elise turned to him. "The stock tanked, Mr. Reynolds. Your faith in Mr. Park's illusion is what got us here. Transparency is the only currency we have left." The vote passed. Park sat through the remaining 40 minutes in a state of mute fury. His empire was being dismantled clause by clause, and the architect was the woman he'd fired for being out of place. As the meeting adjourned, he cornered Elise in the hallway. "This is about revenge, a petty, pathetic grudge." She looked at him, her eyes calm. "No, Jason, this is about physics. You built a structure on a foundation of arrogance and exclusion. It was structurally unsound. I'm just the inspector who finally condemned it. The fact that you once threw me off the site is coincidental." She walked away, leaving him in the empty hallway, his keycard now useless against the biometric lock of his own office door. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in controlled demolition. Elise's first company-wide email as chairperson was brief. It announced leadership changes, affirmed commitment to employees, and promised a full investigation into operational failures. It made no mention of her past, but the rumor mill is a powerful force. A version of the story began to leak from the old HR department. The new chair was the cleaner Park had fired. It spread through Slack channels and lunch tables with electric speed. For the rank-and-file employees, it was not a scandal, it was a myth made real. The underdog had stormed the castle. Elise, aware of the whispers, made a calculated decision. She called an all-hands meeting in the vast first-floor atrium, the same space she used to vacuum. She walked onto the stage, no podium, just a microphone. She said, "My name is Elise Carter. 5 years ago, I worked here in the facilities department. I was fired from that job by Jason Park for being on this floor during business hours. Some of you have heard that story. It's true." The room was utterly still. "I am not here today because of that story. I am here because the decisions made in the rooms I once cleaned brought this company to the brink of collapse. I am here because the people who made those decisions overlooked the essential, unglamorous work that makes innovation possible, the work of maintenance, of infrastructure, of stability. That ends now. She did not present a grand vision. She presented a repair plan. She announced the immediate end of the private Apex floor. The space would be converted into collaborative engineering labs. The exclusive Chronos contract would be put out for competitive bid. A full review of all third-party vendor relationships, starting with the cleaning contractor, would begin the following week. The message was clear: no more shadows, no more casts. As she left the stage, the applause started not from the executives, but from the back of the room, from the facilities and admin staff. It rolled forward in a wave. Jason Park watched a live stream of the meeting from his penthouse. The reported surge in internal morale metrics the next day was the final, insulting blow. His lawyers advised him to negotiate a graceful exit package. His pride refused. He began his own counter-campaign. He reached out to his remaining loyalists in the company, those who owed their careers to him. He tasked them with finding anything, any mistake, any ethical lapse, any hint of impropriety in Elise Carter's rapid ascent or the hedge fund's short position. He was looking for a scandal to trade. What his team found instead was a pattern far more dangerous to his narrative: consistency. Elise Carter's analysis was sound. Her predictions had been correct. The hedge fund had operated within legal boundaries. Her degree was legitimate. There was no smoking gun, only a mounting pile of evidence that she had been right and he had been catastrophically wrong. Meanwhile, Elise was operating on two tracks. Publicly, she was the steady hand. Privately, she was executing the final phase of her plan. With David Chen, she reviewed the company's most valuable remaining asset, its patent portfolio for the core behavioral algorithms. Park had aggressively sued competitors for infringement, but he had also, in a twist of irony, licensed the technology to a handful of large consumer data firms under highly restrictive terms. The revenue was significant, but the contracts were complex and legally fraught. One licensee, a massive social media company, was in a dispute over royalties. The lawsuit was a ticking liability. Elise's hedge fund allies saw an opportunity. If they could settle that lawsuit favorably and then bundle the patents into a new, separate corporate entity, they could spin it off, unlock massive value, and pay down the crushing debt. But it required the cooperation of the licensees. And the key licensee, the social media giant, was run by a famously mercurial billionaire who had once been Jason Park's rival and occasional golf partner. Park learned of this plan through a leaked board memo. He saw his final move. He placed a call to that rival billionaire. He offered a trade, sabotaged the patent settlement talks by insisting on untenable terms, and in return, Park would give him proprietary insights into Ethelgard's next-generation AI research that was, technically, still the company's property. It was corporate espionage. It was also, Park believed, his only path back to relevance. What he did not know was that Elise had anticipated his desperation. She had instructed David Chen to forward all executive communication logs to the General Counsel's office for compliance review during the transition. The automated system flagged Park's external email to his rival's private server. The evidence landed in Elise's inbox at 10:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. She was at home, helping her 9-year-old son Isaiah with a math problem. She read the email chain twice. Then she closed her laptop. She didn't call her lawyers. She didn't call the board. She finished the math problem with Isaiah, a lesson on fractions. She put him to bed. Then she sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd studied for her degree, and she made a list. On one side, the legal path: take the evidence to the SEC, launch a lawsuit, publicly destroy Jason Park. On the other side, the strategic path. The next morning, she summoned David Chen and the General Counsel to the Apex, now just called the 6th floor. She laid out the evidence. The General Counsel was apoplectic. "This is indefensible. We have to act immediately. This is a breach of his fiduciary duty that could land him in jail." Elise was quiet. "What happens to the patent settlement talks if we publicly accuse our former CEO of industrial espionage?" David Chen frowned. "They collapse. The stock tanks further. The vultures circle." Elise nodded. "So we don't make it public, we use it." She outlined her play. They would not confront Park. They would confront his rival, the social media CEO. They would present the email chain not as a crime, but as a demonstration of Jason Park's diminished value and unstable judgment. They would offer the rival a choice: proceed with Park's illegal, messy plan, or work with the new, stable leadership on a settlement that would make everyone wealthier. It was a risk. It relied on the rival being more greedy than loyal. That afternoon, David Chen placed the call. He read the key lines from Park's email. There was a long silence on the other end. Then the rival said, "Park always was an emotional investor. Send your settlement terms over." The deal was signed within the week. The announcement of the favorable patent settlement sent Ethelgard's battered stock soaring 20%. Jason Park, watching from the sidelines, was baffled. His plot had failed silently. He received no angry call, no lawsuit, nothing, just silence. Silence was more terrifying than any lawsuit. It meant he was no longer considered a threat. He was irrelevant. On Friday of that week, Elise Carter walked into the sixth-floor server room, now just another part of the engineering lab. The Chronos hardware was being systematically replaced with standard competitive infrastructure. A young engineer was running diagnostics. He looked up, startled to see the chairperson. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Elise smiled. "Just observing, carry on." He stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the servers, a sound that had once been the exclusive heartbeat of Jason Park's kingdom. Now it was just infrastructure being maintained. She had won. But winning a battle is not the same as winning a war. And Jason Park, stripped of his title, his equity evaporating and his reputation in tatters, was now a cornered animal. And cornered animals do not negotiate. They lash out. He still had one weapon left, the court of public opinion. He contacted a prominent tech journalist, a man known for sympathetic profiles of fallen founders. He offered the full, emotional story. The visionary founder, betrayed by his board, ousted in a conspiracy led by a vengeful former employee with a shady hedge fund backing. He framed Elise not as a savvy analyst, but as a puppet for short sellers who had manipulated the company's downfall for profit. It was a narrative of grievance and victimhood, and it was dangerously compelling. The journalist agreed to an interview. The story was set to run in a major business magazine in 2 weeks. Elise's head of communications caught wind of the piece. The tip-off was vague. "Park is telling his side. It's ugly." Elise now faced a threat no financial model could predict. A smear campaign that could unravel her credibility, scare the lenders, and destabilize the entire recovery. She had to respond, but a direct denial would just feed the story. She needed to flip the narrative, not fight it. And to do that, she needed to reveal the one piece of information she had kept buried for 5 years, the real reason behind her severance package and the non-disclosure agreement. She called Priya Sharma her old mentor. "It's time," she said. "We need to find Chloe." Chloe was the junior HR employee who had leaked the truth about the hush money 5 years ago. She had left Ethelgard shortly after. Finding her was the first step. What Chloe knew would change everything. But reaching out to her would also set a final, irreversible chain of events in motion. Chloe, the former HR analyst, was living under a new name in Portland, Oregon. She had left Silicon Valley and never looked back. When Priya Sharma's email landed in her inbox, her response was a single line: "I knew you'd find me. I kept everything." What she provided was not just her memory of a phone call. It was a digital trove. During her final 2 weeks at Ethelgard, after deciding to resign, Chloe had performed what she called a righteous download. She had access to the secure HR archive. She copied files, the original incident report on Elise's firing, the internal emails from Jason Park to the head of security mandating a zero-tolerance press on the breach, the financial authorization for the oversized severance, and most critically, the digital signature logs for the non-disclosure agreement. But the most explosive item was a series of deleted Slack messages she had captured via screenshot. They were between Park and the then head of legal. Park had written, "Make the NDA ironclad. I don't care if it's 6 months' salary. The narrative is everything. She was a security risk. That's the only story." The legal head replied, "Understood. We'll frame it as a generous severance for protocol violation. No mention of the investor." Park's final message: "Good, clean it up." This was the explicit proof that the firing was a narrative manipulation, a cover-up to protect Jason Park's image in front of an investor. It turned a personal slight into a documented act of corporate fraud, misusing company funds to silence an employee for a leader's personal reputation. Elise now held the weapon, but using it required precision. A public dump would look like a personal attack. She needed to anchor it to a larger, current issue. The impending magazine profile of Park was the perfect vehicle. She contacted the very journalist who was writing the sympathetic piece. She did not ask him to kill the story. She offered him a bigger one. "You're writing about a fallen founder," she said. "But what if the fall began much earlier, with a pattern of using company resources to bury mistakes?" She sent him the documents, with Chloe's identity redacted. The journalist, facing a choice between a sob story and a scoop, chose the scoop. The magazine piece was radically rewritten. It ran under the headline, "The Code of Silence: How Ethelgard's Culture of Secrecy Began with a Cleaning Cart." It laid out the entire incident, the hush money, and framed it as the original sin that led to the larger Chronos deception. The public and industry reaction was a seismic shift. Park was no longer a wronged visionary. He was a petty tyrant who used legal tools to crush low-level employees. The lender consortium, initially nervous about the drama, now saw Elise's exposure of the truth as a necessary purge, strengthening their resolve. But Jason Park was not finished. The magazine article triggered a class action lawsuit from former Ethelgard employees who had been terminated under similar, opaque circumstances, alleging a pattern of retaliatory firings. The discovery process for that lawsuit would open every personnel file for a decade. Park's lawyers advised him to settle quickly. Instead, he went on the offensive in the most unexpected way. He filed a cross-complaint against Elise Carter and the hedge fund, alleging they had conspired to manipulate Ethelgard's stock price. His claim was that Elise's so-called analysis was based on material, non-public information, the confidential details of the Apex Floor's server infrastructure she learned as an employee. It was a brilliant, dangerous legal gambit. It reframed her insight as industrial espionage. If it stuck, not only could her takeover be reversed, she could face criminal charges. The lawsuit created a chilling effect. The patent spin-off plans stalled. The stock price wobbled. Elise's allies on the board grew nervous. David Chen came to her office, his face grim. "He's arguing you had insider knowledge of a material flaw. Did you use specific technical details from your time as staff?" Elise was calm. "I used my eyes. I saw a private technician going to a locked room. That's not a trade secret. That's an observation. The law on what constitutes non-public information for a non-technical employee is fuzzy," Chen replied. "He can tie you up in court for years and bleed the company dry in the process." Elise saw the trap. Park couldn't win on merit, so he would win by exhausting her resources. She needed to dismantle his legal theory at its root. She realized the flaw in his argument. It relied on the assumption that the server vulnerability was a secret. What if it was? What if it had been documented and ignored? She dove back into the pre-Chronos acquisition era. She ordered her team to pull every single hardware audit, every IT maintenance report, every vendor assessment from the 3 years before she was fired. Buried in a quarterly IT review from 2018, she found it. A junior system administrator had flagged the single-source vendor risk for the Apex server hardware. The report stated, "Dependency on Chronos creates critical path failure risk. Recommend diversifying supplier base." The report was addressed to the head of infrastructure, who was a direct report to the CTO. The recommendation was marked, acknowledged, and then filed away, never acted upon. The head of infrastructure had been fired by Park in 2019 for insubordination. Elise now had a documented timeline. The risk was known internally years before her firing. It was not secret information, it was neglected information. Park's lawsuit claimed she stole a secret. She could now prove the company had willfully ignored a documented warning. This changed everything. It moved the narrative from employee espionage to management malpractice. She filed a motion to dismiss Park's lawsuit, attaching the ignored IT report. The legal battle was now a public referendum on Park's competence, but Park, sensing the ground crumbling, made one final, desperate play. He reached out to Elise directly, not through lawyers. A handwritten letter delivered by courier to her home. It was short. "You have what you wanted, the company, the vindication. Let's end this. A quiet settlement. I walk away, you stop the bleeding. We both know a long trial helps no one. Meet me tomorrow. The Apex Lounge, 10 a.m. It was a blatant trap, or a genuine surrender. Elise's security team advised against it. Her instincts screamed it was a performance. But she also knew that his offer contained a sliver of truth. A protracted legal war would hurt the company and the employees most of all. She decided to go, but not alone and not on his terms. She arrived at 9:45 a.m. with David Chen, the general counsel, and a court reporter. She also had the building's head of security discreetly activate the conference room's audiovisual system, which now fed into a cloud server. She was creating an incontrovertible record. Park was already there, standing at the window. He turned, expecting to see only Elise. His eyes flickered over her entourage, and a mask of forced amiability settled on his face. I asked for a private conversation. Nothing about this situation is private anymore, Jason, Elise said, taking a seat. Say what you came to say. What followed was not a surrender. It was a negotiation layered with threat. He proposed dropping all lawsuits in exchange for a consulting contract worth $5 million a year for 5 years, and a public statement from the board thanking him for his foundational vision. It was a ransom note. Elise listened, then said, "You're asking for $25 million and a rewritten history in exchange for stopping a lawsuit you started, based on a theory the court is about to throw out. Why would I do that?" Park leaned forward, his voice dropping, though the microphones caught every word. "Because I can still burn it all down, Elise. I have emails, I have recordings, not just about hardware, about the data. The predictive behavioral algorithms at the heart of the patents you're spinning off, they weren't just built on aggregated data. There were specific cohorts, unconsenting cohorts. A pilot program with a hospital network that provided patient data under a research agreement that my team creatively interpreted. If that comes out, your precious patent spin-off isn't worth the paper it's printed on. It's toxic. You'll be left holding a bankrupt shell." The room went cold. He was no longer arguing about servers or severance. He was admitting to a potential felony, the misuse of private medical data. David Chen paled. The general counsel began to speak, but Elise held up a hand. She looked at Park, not with anger, but with a profound, weary clarity. "You kept a record of your own crimes?" Park smiled, a thin, ugly thing. "Insurance, always have insurance." Elise stood up. "Then this conversation is over. You've just given me the only thing I needed." Park's smile vanished. "What are you talking about?" "You came here to blackmail the chairperson of the board with evidence of your own data crimes, in front of witnesses, with a court reporter present, and while being recorded." She pointed to a small camera lens in the ceiling. "You're not getting a consulting contract, Jason. You're getting a visit from the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice. Your insurance policy just became my prosecution exhibit." Jason Park did not move. He simply stared as the full magnitude of his miscalculations settled over him. He had aimed for her empire and shot himself in the head. Elise walked out of the lounge, her team following. In the elevator down, David Chen let out a long breath. "What now?" Elise's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched. "Now we do what we should have done from the beginning. We call the regulators ourselves. We disclose the data issue, cooperate fully, and carve the cancer out of this company with a scalpel, not a hatchet. It's the only way to save what's left." It was the nuclear option. Voluntary disclosure would trigger unimaginable short-term pain, massive fines, the collapse of the patent deal, a potential death spiral for the stock. But it was the only path to any future legitimacy. As she prepared to make the call that would likely destroy the shareholder value she had fought so hard to secure, she realized this was the final, brutal test. Victory was no longer about owning the company. It was about being willing to break it, to rebuild something real from the rubble. The call to the regulators was not an end. It was a controlled detonation. Elise Carter had to destroy the company she now chaired to have any hope of saving it. Within hours of her disclosure to the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice, Ethelgard Technologies was under consent decree. Trading of its stock was halted. The patent spin-off deal was frozen. Headlines screamed about a data privacy scandal of epic proportions. The short-term value of the company evaporated. This was the price of truth. But within that chaos, Elise and David Chen executed a brutal triage. They cooperated with investigators with total transparency, identifying the exact scope of the illicit hospital data pilot. They publicly severed all ties with the involved third-party data firm. And they made an unprecedented offer to the regulators. Ethelgard would fund an independent, lifetime identity protection service for every individual in the compromised data set, a pool of nearly 100,000 people. The cost would be staggering, but it was the only moral path forward. Meanwhile, the evidence from the Apex Lounge meeting was handed over. Jason Park was now the sole target of the criminal investigation for data misuse and attempted blackmail. His legal team abandoned him. Within a month, he was indicted on multiple federal counts. His assets were frozen to pay legal fees and potential fines. The visionary founder was now a defendant. For Ethelgard, the path was stark. bankruptcy or radical rebirth. The lender consortium, facing a total loss, reluctantly agreed to Elise's final, audacious plan, a prepackaged Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company would shed its toxic debts and liabilities, including the massive fines, and emerge as a new entity. The patents, once the crown jewels, were sold at a steep discount to a consortium of competitors, the proceeds funding the Victim Protection Fund and providing a small return to creditors. What remained was not a predictive analytics giant, but something smaller and more focused. The company's robust, low-margin business-to-business data infrastructure platform, the unsexy back-end work that had always actually turned a profit. It was renamed Ether Core. Elise Carter was named CEO. She moved the headquarters out of the Glass Palace. The new office was in a practical building in a less glamorous zip code. The staff that remained was a skeleton crew of engineers, operations staff, and yes, facilities managers. The culture was rebuilt on a single principle: operational integrity. No more private floors, no more unchecked founders. Salaries were capped with profit sharing for all employees. The first hire was a chief ethics officer. The story should end there. A fallen titan, a resilient underdog, a company reborn. But history is rarely so neat. 18 months after the bankruptcy, Ether Core was stable, modestly profitable, and utterly out of the spotlight. Elise was at her son Isaiah's school for a parent-teacher conference when her phone buzzed with an alert. The Department of Justice had announced a settlement with Jason Park. Facing the overwhelming evidence, he had pled guilty to a single count of wire fraud in exchange for a sentence of 18 months in a minimum security prison, 3 years of probation, and a permanent ban from serving as an officer or director of a public company. He was also required to pay a personal fine of $2.5 million, which effectively cleaned out his remaining non-protected assets. He was ruined. That evening, Elise sat with Isaiah at their kitchen table. He was now 10. He looked at her and asked, "Is the bad man going to jail?" She considered her words carefully. "Yes, for a while." "Good," Isaiah said, and returned to his homework. For Elise, there was no triumphant feeling, only a hollow quiet. The victory was ashes and debt and 1,000 exhausted hours. The surprising final detail emerged a week later. A certified letter arrived at the Ether Core office. It was from Jason Park's defense attorney. Enclosed was a single, handwritten page on plain stationery. It was not an apology, it was a question. Park had written, "You won, you have the company such as it is, you have the narrative, was it worth it, all of it for a grudge over a spilled coffee?" Elise read it several times. She did not answer immediately. She waited 3 days. Then she wrote a reply, also by hand. She did not send it to his attorney. She sent it to the Federal Correctional Facility where he was awaiting designation. Her letter said, "Jason, you still don't understand. It was never about the coffee. It was about the system that valued a clean narrative over a human being. I didn't want your company. I wanted to break that system. The company was just the mechanism. And to answer your question, yes, it was worth it, not for me, for the people who come after. They will walk into buildings and not be made to feel invisible. That is the only thing that matters." EC, she did not expect a reply. She received none. The story of Elise Carter and Jason Park enters the lore of Silicon Valley as a cautionary tale and a strange modern fable, but the real legacy is quieter. Ether Core continues to operate reliably without fanfare. Elise still lives in the same modest home she bought with her hedge fund bonus. She serves on the board of Priya Sharma's ethical AI nonprofit, and once a quarter, she invites the facility's staff at Ether Core to have lunch with the engineering team in the same room at the same time. There are no private floors. There is just work to be done. The final, surprising detail is not about empires or revenge. It is about a small, funded scholarship program at a local community college for single parents studying data science. It was established anonymously. But the required internship is at Ether Core. The first recipient, a young woman named Maria, started last semester. When asked why she chose the program, she said, "I read about this place. They say the woman who runs it used to clean offices. She gets it." Elise Carter never confirmed her role in the scholarship. She didn't need to. The cycle had begun again, not with a firing, but with an opportunity. The door to the Glass Palace was closed forever. But a different, more solid door had been opened. So what does this story, this collision of two vastly different realities, actually tell us? It's not a simple parable of revenge. It's a case study in visibility. For years, the tech industry has celebrated the myth of the lone genius, the disruptive founder who operates beyond the rules. We built glass palaces to house them, literally and figuratively. But this story forces us to ask, who cleans the glass? And what do they see from that vantage point that the genius, staring out at his kingdom, cannot? Elise Carter's journey reveals a fundamental truth. The most accurate risk assessment often comes not from the top floor, but from the ground floor. It comes from those who understand how the systems actually function, not just how they're supposed to function on a slide deck. Her power wasn't forged in the boardroom. It was forged in the quiet observation of its aftermath, in the patterns of behavior everyone else was too busy or too proud to notice. Jason Park's fatal error was not firing an employee. It was believing that the person he fired could be erased from the narrative with a check and a legal document. He confused position with perspective and money with consequence. In the end, the cleaner he dismissed understood the structural integrity of his empire better than he did because she had touched its foundations. This is not just a business story. It's a story about the value we assign to different kinds of work and different kinds of people. It asks us to consider who in our own worlds we might be overlooking, whose insights we might be dismissing based on title or role. The next great idea, or the warning that saves everything, might not come from a credentialed expert. It might come from the person who has been quietly watching it all take shape. Elise's legacy at Ether Core is a blueprint for something new. A company built not on cults of personality or exclusive genius, but on collective diligence. It's a recognition that integrity is an operational function, not a press release, and that a truly resilient enterprise requires every door to be open and every voice to have a route to the room where decisions are made. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt unseen in a system or witnessed an injustice that seemed too entrenched to challenge, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what part of this journey struck a chord. And if you believe in stories that dig deeper than the headline, that explore the complex human machinery behind the news, then help us build this community. Hit subscribe and join us as we unravel the next narrative, because the most powerful stories are never about one person's triumph. They're about the patterns they reveal and the doors they open for everyone else. Thank you for watching.